Joraku, a game that I saw for the first time at Gen Con in 2017. I think that is when the game was being released in the US for the first time. Originally a game by Mo Ideas and published in the US by TMG. Joraku, as soon as I looked at it, looked particularly interesting because it is a blend of two mechanics that we don't usually see together. Trick-taking card games and area control, which means that at the core this is a card-driven game in which you play cards to do stuff on the board. The theme is medieval Japan, I guess. The game is fairly abstract, so the theme doesn't really come across all that much, but there is a little bit of theme there. Nothing else. The art that represents the theme is pleasant. In this video I'm going to tell you how Joraku plays, and then I'm going to share some ideas and impressions that I had after playing the game. At the beginning of the game, you shuffle this small deck of daimyo cards, and then you give one to each player randomly. These cards are numbered from 1 to 6, and they indicate the position of your daimyo at the beginning of the game. If I receive this card here, the number 4, I take my daimyo piece and I place it in the area marked 4. As you can see, there are areas there marked from 1 to 6, and then there is the Kyoto area, which is very valuable at the beginning, at the end of the game, and it is not marked by any number. And if I got this card here, then I place my daimyo here. Very simple. Each player has a set of playing pieces. There is a daimyo piece, very neat, and then cubes that represent samurai. After the initial placements, this other player goes here, and this other player goes here. It is time to get started. This is basically a card-driven game. You will receive a hand of cards from this deck here, and then you will play these cards to generate action points that you will use to perform actions on the board, and or to put reinforcements from your personal pool to the board. And this card-driven engine is based on a trick-taking idea, and it's very simple. It's very simple. Now, each player receives a hand of 5 cards. Then the player with the highest daimyo at the beginning of the game gets this card here, which pretty much means first player card, and it indicates the player that just won a round, I should say a hand, and will go first in the next hand. Also, it is a reminder of how scoring works at the end of each hand. So each player has a hand of 5 cards. You play a card, everybody will play a card, then we will score that hand using this card. We will give the card to the player that just won. The player will go first in the next hand. Again, each player will play a card, we resolve, score, and so on and so forth. But what do you do with these cards? Actually, before we get there, how they are played. The first player that has this card, either because that's the beginning of the game or because the player won the previous hand, the player plays a card. The cards are divided in suits based on color, so I don't know how colorblind friendly this game is going to be. So here I have the blue, the red, and the yellow suit. The first player plays a card, say I play this one, and then the other players have to play a card of the same suit if they can. If you don't have any card of the same suit, then you can play any other card. At the end of the hand, the player is the winner of the hand is the player that played the highest total, if these are the cards. Because the player didn't have any red, it is the cards. This player will win that hand and will take this card here. There is in the deck a card that represents a ninja. The ninja doesn't have a numerical value, so the ninja is really the highest card. Actually, it cannot possibly be the highest card. But the ninja wins if during that hand a 6 was played. The ninja kills the big 6 guy. So again, if that was the situation, then the player that played the ninja wins. And again, winning a hand has the advantage of giving you this card here and letting you go first the next hand. But this is not all that happens, because there is, of course, a synergy between the cards that you play and what happens on the board. When you play a card, following the restrictions that I just that I just explained, you can use it to do things. Suppose you played a ninja card, and here you have this very useful player aid, or one per player, explaining to you what the cards do. So I explained the general mechanism. You play, you follow suit if you can, etc., etc. But you have to remember that after you play a card, that player will perform actions based on that card. Then the next player will play their card, following suit if they can, will perform actions with that card, and so on and so forth. And at the end, we evaluate who the winner is, and we give them this card. As for the actions, basically the actions are to reinforce, that is to place cubes from your personal reserve to the board, or to move pieces around, to move your daimyo and or your samurai cubes around, or to eliminate enemy pieces. If you play the ninja, you may play 0 to 3 samurai cubes from your reserve to any map on the area, which can be very powerful because they can be in any and all areas, no restrictions. Other reinforcement cards have restrictions, as we will see later. If you play a card with a number 1 to 6, you can choose to use the card either to reinforce, but in this case you place tokens from your reserve to the area with the same number as the card. So if I played a 6 and I use it for reinforcement, I can only place up to 3 cubes to my reserve into the area that is numbered as 6. Or I can gain action points equal to the number of the card, 6 action points, 3 action points, and use them to perform actions. For 2 action points, I can move my daimyo to an adjacent area, boop, like that. For 1 action point, I can move samurai tokens, again to adjacent areas, 1 action point, 2 action points. And for an action point, I can remove an enemy samurai in my daimyo's area. Suppose I am green player and I decide to spend 2 action points, 1 to remove this one and 1 to remove this one. So neat. That's how you use actions. Actually, something I didn't mention at the beginning. After players receive their hand of cards, they choose 2 and they give them to the player to the left. So you get a sense of what the player to the left has in their hand, because you stuck some, you place some cards there yourself, but also you know that the player to your right knows part of your hand. And as the game progresses, the cards will change value, because cards with high numbers, say 6, are super awesome because they give you 6 action points. You can do a ton of stuff. However, they only allow you to reinforce in this area. High cards allow you to reinforce in this area. In the later game, the areas that are most valuable in terms of victory points are these areas here. So these cards are not nearly as good, because now you're spending a lot of action points to move your people from there to areas that are valuable, as opposed to a 1, say, will allow you to deploy 3 people right there, and again this area is more valuable in the late game. So you perform these actions, moving people around, adding your people to the board, eliminating enemy pieces, and again, how do you score points? At the end of each hand, we use this card as a reminder how you score. At the end of each hand, the area that is scored is the area where the daimyo of the player that won that hand is. If I'm the green player and I just won that hand because, say, this was it. I played the 6, I am the green player, I take this card, and now we score the area where my daimyo is. The first player that has majority there scores 3 points, second player 2 points, third player 1 point. And here, for example, I am the only one, so I'm going to score 3 points. Hooray! And here I have to turn the score track. Oopsie daisy. I have the score track there. And I just scored 3 points. Suppose that then there was blue, that is second player, then blue also scores 2 points. However, being the player that won the hand, and therefore whose daimyo determines the area that will be scored, doesn't mean that you're gonna necessarily score the most. I won this, say, I won this hand, I get this card, my daimyo is gonna score, or better, the area in which my daimyo is going to score. But here, blue has majority, so although I was the one that won, now blue gets 3 points, and I, green, am second. By the way, the daimyo counts as 2 points for influence, and the cubes count as 1. So during a hand, you're trying to figure out who the winner is going to be, and you're trying to get a good presence there, so you'll be able to get some points here when the area with the daimyo of the winner of the hand is going to score. So you're going to have a scoring phase, a small scoring phase, let's say, at the end of each hand. Remember, each player has 5 cards, so there's going to be 5 such hands, there's going to be 5 such turns, and 5 such scoring phases. Then the main round or the main turn is over, and now we're gonna score again, but now scoring gets very serious. Why? I'm dumping things here just to see what happens. Now scoring gets serious because at the end, when the 5 cards hand that the players had at the beginning is depleted, the first round is over, and now we're gonna score each area based on the values here on the first band of this table here. So as you can see, that is at the end of the first round. Then each player receives 5 more cards. We play, as we said, with 5 small scorings. At the end of that sequence, everybody's hands are depleted. We are going to do the second round of scoring based on the areas. Then we're going to do this again a third time. At the end of the third turn, we're going to score each area based on this line here. At that point, the game is over. The player with the highest score is the winner of the game. That means that when everybody's hand is depleted, for the first time, we're going to use this line here, and we're going to check in each area to see who is first, second, and third. If there is a tie, all tie players are bumped to the next lowest rank, and they get that number of points, and everybody else is bumped down in the same way. Here, for example, if it's at the end of the first round, we look at this area, and now green has 2, blue has 4, so blue scores 3 points, and green 2. If it was this same situation, but at the end of the game, after the third round, now blue is getting 7 points, and the green is getting 4. If we're looking at this area here, there is a tie between yellow and red, so they get the next rank, and so on and so forth. But as you can see, the values change early on. This area is very valuable, but starting from the end of the second turn is worth 0, nothing. And the same applies in different ways to other areas of the board. The values towards the left are low in the early scoring phases, and they increase over time, and the opposite is true on the other side, where the values are high at the beginning and they decrease over time. So the valuable areas, the value of the areas changes throughout the game, and in later phases you will see, well, the subtitle is The March to Kyoto, and you will see people moving towards Kyoto. Also, you may expect towards the end there's a couple of battle royales here, as everybody is gathering here with as many pieces as they can, and they're going to use actions to kill other pieces. It may be, if you have a 6 at this point, in the later phase, it's useless to send people to the 6th area, which is worth 0. So you're probably going to use your action points to eliminate other cubes here, as everybody is gathering here, and you're going to eliminate enemy pieces, trying to manipulate the number that everybody has to be able to achieve majority. Remember, you don't win by having many pieces, you win by having more pieces than the opponent. As you can see, the final score in these two areas, and in general in this section of the map, is very good. Having majority at the end of the game in Kyoto gives you 15 points, 5 for second place, and so 10 for second place and 5 for third. This other area, 10, 7, 4. Really good values. And this is how the game gives you this sense of like of a march towards Kyoto, simply by changing the value of the areas over time. Before we move on to the conclusion, I had to show you an area of the board that I don't like at all, which is the scoring track. It's small and crowded, and so when things are like this and I have to move green with my big sausage fingers, I'm gonna start moving things around. I'm gonna start pushing things around unwillingly. So it gets really, really annoying. I wish the score track had bigger boxes and not so crowded next to one another. Another thing that is really annoying is look at the way the numbers are placed. These numbers are barely readable, are pretty hard to read with the exception of the big ones. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and then it goes 5, 6, 7, 8. It goes like this. It is pretty annoying. If they were in a normal, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, every number going from left to right, then if I get 4 points, I know I have to go there. 5 points, it's just much more intuitive to move down. This way, again, between the fact that when the cubes are next to each other, it's hard to move one without moving another one, and now I don't remember where the heck that one was, and then I'm going to count to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points. Oh wait, no, not a second, it was 1, 2, 3, 4. The fact that you move around like a snake is really makes it harder to score. Also, the board is made of 4 mini boards, as you can see, that are adjacent to one another, and that is no big deal, but for the fact that if you accidentally just touch this one, if it was a single board, it would be heavier. So if you kind of like touch one side, the overall weight to kind of like hold it down a little bit, but it's kind of easy here to mistakenly, as you move your hand, bump into this, and now we have a mess here. And maybe the placement of the cubes was a little bit ambiguous to start with. So just there was too much work making the turn track, the score track work, much more work than I expected. In case, if you are watching your publishing, in case you're playing a second edition, my suggestion is just narrow this area a little bit and place a scoring track here all around the board. You had all the you have all the room in the world to have a scoring track that moves around. Now you don't have these crowded areas here like this. You have them along a single path, much easier to see, to visualize, and to use. That's my only complaint about the production. The scoring track somehow detracted from the enjoyment of the game, but not much really. Games have something in common with alcohol, dogs, and explosives, which is you cannot estimate how dangerous they are based on their size. And this is true of Joraku. This is a small box, but there is much more game in here than you would imagine. There's a much bigger game than the box will let you believe. And not just because the board, once you put it together, is bigger than the box. And that's that we have in many games. The size, depth, meatiness. This is a game that is quite a puzzler. There's a lot to think about. The strategy has many interesting angles and wrinkles to it. Again, by a game this small, you may expect a nice, cute filler, but it's not. It's a full size, it's a grown-up game. As I said, with a lot going on. There are a lot of interesting decisions that you have to make, and I like them all. I like the fact that the game clearly has an architecture, clearly has a structure. On one hand, that is based on the fact that the scoring values of the areas change throughout the game. There are other games that do that, again, that I like very much. Dynasties, recently remade into Sun Tzu, has the fact that the value of the areas changes, but that is randomly, doesn't give you an overall arching story, arching narrative. Again, here I should say arching narrative, overarching narrative rather than story, because it's not much of a plot, but it is a structure that goes in a certain direction, and there's a certain pleasure in seeing it developing that way. In this case, as the pieces are moving towards the most valuable areas progressively. The other element, of course, that gives direction and a sense of structure to the experience is the fact that the cards are not equally valuable throughout the game. A 6 is always valuable, at least for action points, but a 1, which is kind of like a bit of a pain in the neck early on, may be very valuable early on. Especially if you have some pieces available to use a 1 to reinforce in area 1 when the areas around there are particularly valuable. This is not a trivial point. It's a game where you can remove enemy pieces, yes, but it's not a quote-unquote war game, because removing enemy pieces may give the opponent a big boon. You may be trying to get majority in an area towards the rear of the board, so that you can score when we're scoring maybe at the end of an age or just at the end of a round, those 3-1 scoring points. You eliminate my pieces, and that gives you 3 points and gives me 0 points that way. Hooray! Otherwise, maybe you got a 3 and I 2, or you would have gotten 2 and I 3. But now you get 3 and you don't have to share, and I have to take all of my cubes back. And then next turn I play a 1, and those cubes are teleported right where I want them to be. So by removing pieces of the opponent, you may help them because you give them pieces, and then using deployment, they may bring to areas of the board where they want to go in a much more efficient and economic fashion than if you had to spend action points to move them area to area. So there is another interesting element there. Killing enemy pieces can be particularly powerful, but also can backfire big time, so you have to be careful about that. I like how the game is situational. Like most games that I like, there's a situational element, which means there is no silver bullet, there is no magic strategy that always works, but everything is about analyzing the board and seeing what the opponents are doing or what they're likely to try to do. And the value of certain actions, of course, is relative to that. I like that very much. You have to keep an eye on the cards. Yes, you're looking at the board, but of course, as you see players playing cards, and as the game goes around that way, then you get a sense of what players may have in their hand. In some cases, you know part of their hand. So again, that is something that you take into account. Okay, most ninjas came out. Most ninjas were played. Maybe this time now for me to play my 6. Even if I'm the first player, so chances that the ninja will come are considerable. Unless I want to lose this hand, which is entirely possible. I want to play my 6 cards and do a lot of interesting action point stuff. And then I want to lose this hand, especially if the winner is going to be the player next to me. So the player is going to go first, next hand, and I'm going to go last. Going last can be of huge advantage, especially at the end of a season or an age. That is at the end of a round when you do the scoring. Then if I'm going last, I'm going to be able to make the last adjustments and know exactly what's going to happen and be able to get majority just by 1 cube. Similarly, again, knowing who already went, even if I'm just not the last, but second to last, well, then there are fewer players that I have to worry about. So there is a nice balancing element there. If I were first, I'm going to get most likely I'm going to get points because I knew I was going to win, or at least I was trying to win. So I made in such a way that I had a lot of points, I had a lot of presence in my daimyo area, so I get to score there. So I go first, I get to dictate the next hand, most likely I scored points, but the advantage of going last is that you can make fine adjustments and know that no one is going to mess up with them. You're going to score at the end of that round and at that hand and possibly the whole round. So sometimes, ideally, you will want to win many rounds and lose the one that is the second to last. Before the last round, you want to lose that one and you want to go as late as possible. Are there ways of tweaking the strategy and increase the chances that it's not just that you lose it, but the player that you want to win will win, so you can go last? Possibly. I've tried to do that, and sometimes it works, sometimes not so much, but definitely there's room for exploration there. What I'm trying to tell you is how deep this game feels. While not being like a heavy civilization game, it's definitely deeper than any game that comes in such a small box has any right to be. It's deeper than it looks at first sight. Trick-taking, those are the simplest games that we have. Area, majority, and control, easy. I just want to have a cube more than you. What's the big deal? And yet, there is much more than meets the eye. Actually, earlier I mentioned Dynasties, later remade into Sun Tzu, which also has this idea of playing cards to do stuff on the board. And that's a game that I like very much. This one I may like a little bit better, although it requires a different type of audience, precisely because the strategy is much more complex than you have in Dynasties. And the game is a little less quote-unquote elegant. You have to keep in mind more actions that can happen. There are just a couple more rules. It's not that easy to teach the game, because if you play a card and you teach and then you do your actions, so then you have to wait until later until you explain how to win the trick. If you explain the trick, then you have to rewind. But let's go back to after you play the first card and what you do then, which is what I did in my video. It's not intuitive. It's not all that intuitive to learn the game, but it's not going to take long to any committed player to learn how to play it. I think it's going to take longer to learn how to play competently, but to be a competent player, to learn how to be a competent player is part of the fun. It's precisely the joy of moving from, you read the list of things that you can do and rules, and as you play, those start clicking together, a bigger and clearer images emerges, and seeing the strategy through the rules. So the forest for the trees is part of the mental joy of learning new games, of seeing, having this blossoming idea, this dawning image of, oh, that's how it works. So it's a game that is a strange combination of mechanics, but the final result I found very pleasing, very satisfying, much more than I expected. I thought that's going to be like a fun, light, neat filler, but I loved it, and the people that I played it with loved it. One of the players thanked me to no end. I went out and bought a copy already. It's a really fun game. It's an impressive little game. Don't be fooled by the small box. There is a big and deep game in here, and one that is going to be a lot of fun to play. Definitely enjoy playing the game. If you're afraid that it's going to get stale because the overall narrative will repeat itself, the game even comes with a bunch of variants, so there is even more room for exploration. But I don't think I'm gonna need those variants anytime soon, because the game as is in its basic version is very tight, very neat, very complex in terms of, like, it gives me a lot of interesting information to analyze while remaining fairly light on the rules. So Joraku, highly recommended, a really good game.